Donald Trump Jr. is going to respond to a subpoena issued by the Republican chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, even though on Sunday the Republican chairman of another Senate committee publicly advised Donald Trump Jr. to ignore that Senate subpoena.
If I were Donald Trump Jr.'s lawyer, I would tell him, you don't need to go back into this environment anymore. You've been there for hours and hours and hours, and nothing being alleged here changes the outcome of the Mueller investigation. I would call it a day.
The 27 psychiatrists and mental health professionals who wrote the book about Donald Trump are going to have to find some time to explain Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham is the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, the committee with jurisdiction over our criminal justice system and our civil justice system. That's the committee that writes federal laws about, among other things, how federal subpoenas are enforced. And the chairman of that committee, who is a lawyer, is publicly advising a witness subpoenaed by the United States Senate to ignore that subpoena, publicly advising him to commit a crime. Psychiatrists studying Lindsey Graham's attempts to subvert and pervert congressional subpoena power need to begin with 20th century Lindsey Graham.
The day Richard Nixon failed to answer that subpoena is the day that he was subject to impeachment, because he took the power from Congress over the impeachment process away from Congress, and he became the judge and jury.
Before Donald Trump Jr. reached an agreement about testifying to the Senate Intelligence Committee late today, last night, Lindsey Graham publicly coached Donald Trump Jr. again, telling the Washington Post, quote, "You just show up and plead the fifth and it's over with," Senator Lindsey O. Graham told reporters Monday, adding that Trump Jr.'s lawyer would have to be an idiot to let him testify again. Lindsey Graham is an obstruction of justice. This is clearly witness tampering. Lindsey Graham could be disbarred as a lawyer for that. And by publicly tampering with a Senate witness, Lindsey Graham violated his oath of office. In any previous Senate, the Senate Ethics Committee would begin an investigation of Lindsey Graham today that would very likely lead to his expulsion from the United States Senate. Something very serious has happened to Lindsey Graham, and we don't know what it is. Something deeply disturbing has happened to Lindsey Graham, and we don't know what it is. And it is not just the difference between 20th century Lindsey Graham and today's Lindsey Graham. It's the difference between Lindsey Graham 3 years ago and Lindsey Graham today.
He's a race-baiting, xenophobic, religious bigot. He doesn't represent my party. He doesn't represent the values that the men and women who wear the uniform are fighting for. I don't think he has the temperament or judgment to be commander-in-chief. I think he's a kook. I think he's crazy. I think he's unfit for office.
It may just be that Lindsey Graham is now running for his life in South Carolina in a way that he wasn't 3 years ago. Lindsey Graham is up for re-election next year, and his very Trumpian public witness tampering and obstruction of justice might just be what a terrified Lindsey Graham has decided he has to do to avoid being challenged in a Republican primary by someone more Trumpian than Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham is now publicly everything he once said Donald Trump is. I have never seen a United States senator disgrace his oath of office more than Lindsey Graham has done just in the last couple of days alone. Apparently, the Fox Network's legal analyst, former Judge Andrew Napolitano, has more influence over Donald Trump Jr. than Lindsey Graham.
I never heard of a senator saying disobey a valid, lawful subpoena issued by the chairman of another Senate committee. The subpoena, just like the one to Bill Barr, is presumed valid. If you can't or don't want to comply with it, you got to challenge it in court. You can't just sit on it, and you can't not show. Somebody will show up with handcuffs.
No matter who you are.
No matter who your father is.
Donald Trump Jr. was smart enough to ignore Lindsey Graham's advice, or at least Donald Trump Jr.'s lawyers were smart enough. And so they have agreed to Donald Trump Jr. testifying once again to the Senate Intelligence Committee, but not publicly. It will be a closed-door session in mid-June with a limited number of topics and will probably not last more than 4 hours. That is the outline of the deal Donald Trump Jr.'s lawyers reached with the Senate Intelligence Committee tonight. The New York Times is reporting tonight that the House Intelligence Committee, chaired by Adam Schiff, is investigating whether lawyers for President Trump and his family helped shape false testimony that Michael Cohen has now admitted he gave to the Intelligence Committee in 2017. In his testimony to the Oversight Committee in February, Michael Cohen said that the Trump lawyers helped edit the false testimony that he gave to Congress in 2017 about a Trump Tower project in Moscow. A May 3rd letter from Chairman Adam Schiff to the Trump family lawyers says, among other things, it appears that your clients may have reviewed, shaped, and edited the false statement that Cohen submitted to the committee, including causing the omission of material facts. In addition, certain of your clients may have engaged in discussions about potential pardons in an effort to deter one or more witnesses from cooperating with authorized investigations. Chairman Schiff is demanding documents from those lawyers in his investigation today. Chairman Schiff said this.
If there were others that were participating in that act of obstruction of justice, if there were others that were knowing of that false statement, participated in the drafting of that false statement, we need to know about it. We need to expose it. And we need to deter other people from coming before our committee and lying.
We're going to lead off our discussion tonight with some veterans of the Senate Judiciary Committee who I am sure have never seen anything like Chairman Lindsey Graham in that committee before. William Yeomans spent 26 years at the Justice Department and was the former chief counsel in the Senate Judiciary Committee. He's now a senior fellow at the Alliance for Justice. Also with us, Ron Klain, a former senior aide to Vice President Joe Biden and President Obama, and a former chief counsel to the Senate Judiciary Committee. And Jason Johnson is with us. He's the politics editor at theroot.com and a professor of politics and media at Morgan State University. He is also an MSNBC contributor. And Jason, I want to start with you because the explanation of Lindsey Graham is not necessarily based on experience working at the Senate Judiciary Committee, because none of us have ever seen anything like it. Is this just what it takes for him to get reelected on a free ride with no Republican challenger in South Carolina?
Well, I think this is what it takes for him to sort of maintain his brand, Lawrence. He clearly made a decision about 2 years ago. I don't know if it's when John McCain passed away. I don't know if it's just what he wants to do. But Lindsey Graham has said, look, I'm going to go to the mat for President Trump in any sort of extreme way I can, whether that means defending Brett Kavanaugh with this whole sort of rally the troops speech he gave, whether it's encouraging other people to not listen to congressional subpoenas. This is what Lindsey Graham wants to do. And look, the fact is, he has a Democratic challenger. I believe it's Jamie Harrison. Lindsey Graham is not safe. But I don't think that this behavior is due to any sort of electoral fears. I think this behavior is due to the fact that he is completely submitted to the Trump aura of power. And the problem is that, it's not just historically he's going to shame himself. That's already a given. It's the fact that he also diminishes the office and makes it more difficult for Republicans who actually want to do their job in the Senate to do so when you have somebody next door trying to be a backseat driver in how we administer justice.
Rod Klain, the conduct I've seen with Lindsey Graham would have gotten you dragged in front of the Senate Ethics Committee back when you were working at the Judiciary Committee. And Donald Trump Jr. was, or his lawyers anyway, were at least smart enough not to listen to Lindsey Graham.
Yeah, credit Trump Jr., credit Andrew Napolitano. It's shocking whenever I agree with him, but he was right on this one. Look, I think that, I agree with Jason. It's hard to explain Senator Graham's behavior as anything other than just kind of a determination just to do Donald Trump's bidding, whatever it is, even really beyond the pale here. The Judiciary Committee, for its good days and bad days, has a vaunted tradition of standing for the law and adherence to the law. And for the chairman of that committee to tell a witness that they don't have to comply with a lawful subpoena from another Senate committee so undermines the institution, so undermines the process. By the way, and this is a subpoena issued by, obviously, a committee chaired by another Republican senator. So this isn't a partisan thing. This is just really an effort to out-Trump any other Trumpy Republican senator.
And Bill Yeomans, we noticed that there was no other Republican senator jumped out there and said, oh yeah, Lindsey Graham is right. You should defy a Senate subpoena. And we know that there's an awful lot of Republicans who love every chance they get to say something pleasing to Donald Trump. And none of them were willing to join Lindsey Graham walking out on that plank.
Well, yeah, I think it's clear how over the top Lindsey Graham was here. It is, as everyone has said, completely outrageous for the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, which oversees the justice, the law enforcement operation of the federal government, to advise someone to defy the law. I do think, though, it's worth noting that there was a tremendous Republican reaction to Richard Burr, who was willing to issue this subpoena on behalf of the Intelligence Committee. And it's my understanding that he got an enormous amount of pressure from other Republican senators who came to the defense of Donald Trump Jr. So while Lindsey Graham stands out, he is not alone.
The inside the room reporting is that Mitch McConnell actually supported Chairman Burr on this, as you would expect a majority leader to do with any of his chairs issuing subpoenas. And Jason Johnson, this is all happening, we always have to remember, within a presidential campaign that is already underway. And
right.
So here we have one of the candidates' sons being subpoenaed and responding to that subpoena to testify to a Senate committee that could involve some jeopardy to that son.
Well, it's some jeopardy to that son, some jeopardy to other members of the family, some jeopardy to the father. Look, Lawrence, I'll be honest. When Barr initially put out the subpoena, I was skeptical. I thought, is this going to be an excuse for Republicans to do this sort of dog and pony show and allow Don Jr. to just give speeches, right? As we've seen in some of these committees, they actually don't ask questions. It's an opportunity for them to sort of play partisan games. But now that it appears that this is a real question, this goes to the heart of what the Republican Party has to worry about. When we go beyond the House and Senate, this goes to the heart of where the Republican Party is in the country. This is a reminder of what we've talked about all along. There are Republicans in this country who do not trust this administration, who do not trust Don Jr., who do feel that they want to get to the bottom of this. I don't think the Barr is acting just sort of out of, pure curiosity about what's going on. He also is reflecting a change in his party that's happening nationally. And the Republicans, they really need to be much more careful about this. They don't have as much strength in their base if they don't have as much strength in their party as they used to have.
Ron Klain, the House Judiciary Committee has now formally scheduled the Don McGahn hearing for a week from today, Tuesday, 10 a.m. next week. And we're not sure how long we will be in suspense about whether Don McGahn will show up or whether he'll show up and take the Fifth Amendment or whether he'll show up and plead executive privilege. What are the possibilities?
Well, first we have to see if Lindsey Graham has legal advice for Don McGahn. Doubtlessly he does. But look, I think all those things you mentioned, Lawrence, are possibilities. And what we have to understand is that, unlike in the Senate, this is really occurring against a backdrop of kind of a massive resistance of Trump and his allies against the investigation. The Trump lawyers were in court today trying to resist a subpoena from the House Oversight Committee for Trump's financial records. They got slapped down hard by the judge in that case. We're going to see what they do with McGahn. But clearly, Donald Trump is trying his best to keep any of this information from coming out on the House side. And they're doing it in this kind of crazy way where they're in court today arguing that Congress shouldn't be able to look at Trump's financial records because it's a legal matter. They were in court a few weeks ago arguing, hey, this isn't a legal matter, it's for Congress. They went to Mueller and said, hey, it's not for the Justice Department, it's for the impeachment process. I mean, it's constitutional three-card Monty that they're trying to play here to avoid this information coming up. But sooner or later, I think the House is going to get to the truth on many of these things.
Bill Yeomans, what strategies does the House have available to it?
Well, the House has to continue pursuing, trying to get witnesses. They're going to have to issue subpoenas, and they have to follow through with contempt. Unfortunately, all of that takes time. They have to go to court to file civil suits to enforce contempt citations, and so they need to follow through. But one thing that I think is very important is that they not get lost in the process fights. So, for instance, on the Mueller report, it is incredibly important that members of the committee continue to make the public aware of what's in the Mueller report. The American public is not going to pay a lot of attention to process fights, as interesting as we lawyers may find them. I think the House Judiciary Committee has to be very creative in finding ways to broadcast the president's incredibly unpatriotic behavior and his criminal behavior. And they need to do that in ways that the American people will listen to.
We have to get a break in here. Bill Yeomans, Klain, Jason Johnson, thank you all for starting us off tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.